Good morning. This is Randy with Snap Judgments, and this is day one of a 5-day Senior Bowl deep dive. First, let me hit you with a quick coffee corner. I forgot to do that yesterday. Today, I'm drinking Seattle's best breakfast blend. It's a good medium roast, not too strong, not too light. It has kind of a nutty flavor to it. Definitely recommended. All right, moving on. Over the past week or so, we've had two separate All Star events take place. Well, really start up the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl. These are entirely different rosters, entirely different players, and entirely separate evaluation tracks. No prospect attends both. The Shrine Bowl wrapped up first, and that week is about opportunity, proving you belong in the draft conversation at all. Now we move to the Senior Bowl, and this is a different level of pressure. The Senior Bowl roster represents players the league already agrees are draftable. This week isn't about getting noticed, it's about confirmation. It's about whether what teams think they know actually holds up when the reps get harder and the margins for error get smaller. I went through the full Senior Bowl roster and identified around 50 prospects I want to spend real time on this week. I grouped them intentionally by position because that's how teams evaluate these events, and because it allows us to compare players directly against their peers instead of just listing names. We're starting where the league starts: defensive line. If you can't hold up in the trenches, nothing else matters. That's true on Sundays, and it's true here. These practice reps, the one on ones, the isolated drills, tell evaluators a great deal about defensive linemen. This is the beginning of the Senior Bowl portion of the draft cycle. Opinions are forming, boards are moving, and this is where traits start separating from projection. As they like to say around this time of year, the draft starts in Mobile. Defensive tackles. Before we get into individual players, it's important to frame how teams look at interior defensive linemen. Teams tolerate inconsistency inside more than anywhere else on the field. If you have size, length, and movement ability, coaches will bet they can fix technique. What they typically won't compromise on is physical thresholds. Early down defensive tackles and passing down defensive tackles are evaluated very differently, and arm length, especially inside, matters more than people think. It changes how gaps are controlled and how blocks are shed. Let's get into the first couple of prospects here that I'd like to talk about. Number one is Caleb Banks, a defensive tackle out of Florida. Caleb Banks measures 6'6", 330 with 35-inch arms, and that immediately puts him in a different category. Humans built like this do not come around often on the interior. He started his collegiate career at Louisville, spent 2 years there, then transferred to Florida, where he played out the rest of his college career. His production arc matters. In 2023, he played all 12 games, but logged just one sack. But in 2024, the light came on. Late in the 2024 season, Banks recorded 7 pressures against LSU, followed by another 7 pressures against Ole Miss the next week. This was an LSU offensive line with multiple NFL draft picks, including their left tackle, right guard, and right tackle. That stretch put him on the radar as a potential top defensive tackle in this class, with some even suggesting he could challenge Peter Woods from Clemson as the top defensive tackle in this class. Banks returned for 2025, intent on improving his draft stock, but health issues kept him off the field. He played just 3 games for 101 total snaps, which will be a red flag for some teams. That makes this Senior Bowl week critical, especially for him. From a trait standpoint, Banks has rare explosiveness for his size and strength you'd expect from a 330-pound defensive tackle. What really sets him apart is his length, and he knows how to use it. He can lock out, control blockers, and blow up plays before they develop. Where he needs work is his football IQ and technique. You'll often see him explode into the backfield, blow up the offensive lineman in front of him, and completely miss where the play actually went. He relies too heavily on brute force, has inconsistent pad level, uneven hand usage, and a shaky anchor. One scouting report summed him up perfectly: tantalizing flashes undermined by technical inconsistencies. Moving on to the next prospect, we're going to talk about Lee Hunter, defensive tackle out of Texas Tech. Lee Hunter measures in at 6'3" and a half, 320 pounds, and his game matches his build. He began his career at UCF before transferring to Texas Tech for his final season as part of a major investment that Tech made in rebuilding their defensive line through the portal. His teammates nicknamed him the Fridge, and that tells you exactly what type of player this is. Hunter is a compact, powerful interior defensive tackle and a prototypical run stuffer. He has a strong anchor that allows him to two gap effectively and take on double teams without getting displaced. For a player his size, his pursuit speed stands out. He plays with heavy hands, disengages well, and consistently makes tackles in traffic. He's played 38 games over the past 3 seasons, so experience is not a concern. There isn't much pass rush production, but the tools are there. Earlier on, he projects as an early down rotational defensive tackle with upside to develop into a 3 down presence with the right coaching. And just a little aside, several people at the Senior Bowl covering the Senior Bowl said Lee Hunter clearly stood out as the best interior defensive lineman. And Todd McShay with the McShay Report actually said that of the 4 top defensive linemen in this event, if he had to choose somebody to rush the passer today, Lee Hunter would be his number one choice, which is a loud, ringing endorsement from one of the more important voices in the draft community. Moving on, I've got Chris McClellan, a defensive tackle out of Missouri. Now, Chris McClellan checks in at 6'3" and 3/8, 315 pounds, with a reported 81-inch wingspan. A 4-star recruit in the 2022 class, he spent 2 seasons at Florida before transferring to Missouri for his final 2 years. He's primarily known as a run defender, but his pass rush profile has developed. In 2025, McClellan recorded 21 pressures and 5 sacks, along with 42 tackles and 7 tackles for loss. He also notched 2 pass breakups, showing awareness in getting his hands up into the throwing lanes. His first step is quick enough to disrupt plays in the backfield, and his motor consistently shows up. He'll chase plays down from behind and doesn't take snaps off. The concern is leverage and anchor. His pad level can get too high, and he can be driven back by double teams. He'll need to improve his ability to sit down and hold the ground. McClellan was a second-team All-SEC selection in 2025 and has already been invited to the Combine, confirming the league views him as draftable. Senior Bowl reps will help determine whether he's a rotational player or a trusted starter. Now, this is a good place to talk about leverage. Last year at the Senior Bowl, we saw this really highlighted, okay? Willie Lampkin, a 5'10", 275-pound center from UNC that ended up signing with the Rams as a UDFA, absolutely embarrassed Dion Walker, who is a 6'7", 350-pound defensive tackle from Kentucky in one-on-ones. That rep went viral last year because it showed how leverage can neutralize massive size advantages. For day 1, day 2, and day 3 defensive tackles, teams value reliability, gap control, anchor, and effort. That's why boring interior players get drafted high every year. The Senior Bowl separates similar body types fast. When you step back and look at this defensive line group as a whole, the biggest theme that jumps out is the size versus quickness balance in this class. There isn't one prototype winning right now. We're seeing success from different body types for different roles. You've got massive interior players who win with length and strength. You've got edge rushers who win with power and effort. And you've got lighter, quicker rushers who can stress pass protections in very specific ways. What this week is doing is forcing teams to answer a question early. How do we want to deploy this player at the next level? Not is he good, but where does he actually fit? Some players help themselves just by showing up. That's important to say out loud. Not everybody needs to dominate. Senior Bowl practices to improve their draft stock. For certain players, simply confirming that they belong physically and athletically in this environment is enough to move them up boards. If you look like you belong, or if you're an LTP, as some like to say, looks the part, That's a Mel Kiper ism. Um, if you hold up in one on ones, if you don't get overwhelmed by the pace of the competition, teams check a box and move on to the next question. On the other side of that, there are players in this group who need confirmation badly. Guys with injury histories, guys with inconsistent tape, guys whose college production doesn't always match their traits. For them, this week isn't optional. It's where teams decide whether they're projecting forward or pulling back. A good practice rep here can outweigh a quiet game. A bad rep, especially repeated reps, sticks in the minds of draft evaluators across the league. That's why defensive line evaluation at the Senior Bowl matters more than almost any other position group. These reps are isolated. There's no scheme to hide behind, no blitzes to manufacture pressure, no stunt that creates a free lane. You either win your rep or you don't. And evaluators trust what they see here because it translates to the league. Another big takeaway is how quickly tiers form on the defensive line. By the end of the first practice, teams already have mental buckets: early down players, sub package rushers, developmental projects, and guys they trust to contribute quickly. Those tiers don't change easily once they're established. You can move within a tier over the course of the week, but jumping tiers requires something really eye catching. That's why day one matters so much. First impressions aren't everything, but they matter more here than people like to admit. When a defensive lineman flashes on the first day, teams want to see if it's repeatable. When he struggles, the question becomes whether he can recover. Either way, the evaluation track is set early. And this ties into something we see every single draft cycle. The trenches always rise as the draft approaches. As we get closer to April, teams start prioritizing sustainability. Quarterbacks and receivers grab attention early, but when draft rooms start stacking boards, offensive and defensive linemen climb. Size, length, and functional athleticism are harder to find than skill players, and teams know it. That's why events like this carry weight for defensive linemen. This week doesn't just confirm what teams think, it helps them decide how aggressively they're willing to invest. Day one isn't the end of the evaluation, but it sets the tone. And for this group, that tone is already clear. If you can't hold up here, nothing else matters. Moving on to the edge group, first of all, I'd like to talk to you about LT Overton. Now, LT Overton measured in at 6'2 and 3/4, 278 pounds, coming in about 2 inches shorter than his listed 6'5 at Alabama. A five-star recruit from Georgia, he started immediately at Texas A&M before transferring to Alabama in 2024, and he actually reclassified, so he was part of the 2022 recruiting class as opposed to the 2023. So he's going to be, I believe, 21 at draft time, which is a little bit on the younger side, despite the fact he is a senior. He has a thick, chiseled frame with surprising lateral movement for a guy his size. Overton is a good run defender with powerful hands and the ability to stack and shed. He also shows more bend than expected for a player built like this. The question is role. Is he an edge? Is he an interior defensive lineman? He's a bit of a tweener, but that versatility can be valuable, especially in the right scheme and with the right coaches. Versatility like that, tweener can be used in multiple different ways in the pre-draft process, and sometimes it's used as a compliment. Other times it's used nearly as an insult. Um, there's a difference between a tweener who has multiple positions and a tweener who doesn't have any position. And that's what you can kind of get into here with a player like this is what can he do well? Because you really will kind of want to build everything around the things he does well and then see if you can add in the other things later on, right? So LT Overton is a good example. He's a great run defender. He's a little smaller than we expected, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. That can help play into the leverage factor when you're coming from lower you're able to put guys down. Again, it's a whole leverage thing, but his pass rush plan needs work. All right. Good run defender needs work on the pass rush plan. And, I think that teams are going to see a lot of value in him. He projects for me as a day two player, probably somewhere in the second round. Moving along, we are going to talk about TJ Parker, an edge player out of Clemson. Now, Parker checks in at 6'3" and 3/8, 5/8. Sorry, very small writing. 263 pounds. In the word of violence defines his game. At the Senior Bowl, the sound when he hits offensive linemen stood out to evaluators there. They talk about the difference between when you hear the pads connect. Sometimes you hear that sound and you can just, that's an NFL guy right there. Um, I remember watching a movie called Trouble with the Curve recently, Clint Eastwood movie, and he talks about the same thing. It's a baseball thing, but he talks about the same thing: the sound when the ball hits the catcher's mitt, and how you can just tell. Because the whole like theme of the movie is his vision is deteriorating essentially, and he said, he can just tell from the sound when the ball hits the catcher's mitt. This is the same thing we're talking about here, okay? The sound when you're making contact with that offensive line. Guys there at the Senior Bowl, they're hearing this over and over and over again, and then you hear one, boom, that just hits different. All right. That's the power of TJ Parker. That's the violence with which he hits offensive linemen that are trying to block him, with which he hits ball carriers, quarterbacks, etc. Um, Trevor from Pro Football Focus described a rep where Parker, and they actually showed the rep too, where Parker just forklifts an offensive lineman and drives him across the pocket entirely, right where the quarterback would be standing. Right, he grabs this guy by the chin essentially, and just drives him like 5 yards across the would be pocket. Absolutely dominates the rep. So other evaluators there also talked about how he had that rep and he had another rep, but other than that, they felt like he really kind of took it easy. So this whole process is going to be very important for him to see, how seriously he takes it, to see kind of consistency and effort. Right, his motor, he runs a little bit hot and cold at times, and so that's kind of one of the questions with him. Um, Now, Parker, he was excellent in 2024, right? Recorded 64 tackles, 19 and a half tackles for loss, and 11 sacks. Against Pitt alone, he posted 5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks. But his 2021 season or 2025 season was a bit disappointing. All right. He ended up recording a total of 39 tackles, 9.5 for loss, and just 5 sacks over 12 games. Not a bad season by most standards, but when compared to his 2024 season, definitely a letdown. As with the entire Clemson team. I mean, Clemson was just, they were bad this year. Um, Now, Parker, he wins with technique and timing rather than like first step explosiveness. Okay. He's got the power, he's got the strength, but it's just that juice right off the line when you're coming at the offensive player right to begin with out of your stance. He's not really a juiced up edge rusher like you look for sometimes. And like I talked about earlier, his motor can run hot and cold. So that's really going to determine, is he a starter or is he a rotational player, right? Because we don't want a guy out there every down who's going to be taking plays off. If you want to take plays off, get on the get on the sideline, take those plays off and come in when you're ready. Play as a DPR, right? Now that drives your value way down in terms of the draft discussion, unless you're an incredible DPR. All right. I mean, a guy like David Bailey comes to mind. Not great in the run game historically, despite decent grade there this season, but excellent at getting after the passer. So is he a little bit of a DPR? Maybe, but the numbers he's going to put up would justify a high draft selection. TJ Parker, this is a little bit of the conversation here. Now he holds up better against the run, but it's more about an effort and a motor thing than anything else. Moving right along, let's talk about Vincent Anthony Jr., an edge player out of Duke. Now, Vincent Anthony Jr. measures in 6'5 and 3/8, 246 pounds, and multiple evaluators described him as all arms when they saw him at the Senior Bowl. This immediately stands out when you see him in person, right? His length is obvious, and it shows up in how offensive tackles have to set up against him. Even when he doesn't win clearly, the reach that he has forces adjustments. He started 12 of 13 games as a freshman at Duke, which tells you how quickly he earned trust in that program. His first step is legitimately explosive, and when he times the snap well, he can put tackles into recovery mode immediately. His motor runs hot from snap to whistle. He doesn't just rush and stop, he pursues plays laterally and downfield with intent. Anthony is also viewed as a leader, both on and off the field, with a strong off field presence and community involvement frequently mentioned by those around the program. Coaches love that, especially for developmental players who may need patience early in their careers. The concerns with Anthony are physical and technical. At under 250 pounds, he's light for many NFL defensive schemes. And when his initial rush is stalled, he lacks consistent counter moves to fall back on. Early on, he projects as a developmental edge rusher, likely contributing on special teams, while teams work to add strength and expand his pass rush arsenal. I'm looking at him as a day 3 pick. He's one of the guys that I'm looking at in the round 6 area. Patriots have four picks in the 6th round, and I could see them using one of them on a guy like him, bring him in kind of into that Elijah Ponder role this year, right? A lot of special teams work, a little bit of work on the field and defense, and just kind of let him settle in, let him grow into the team, and let him start to figure the game out at the NFL level. Moving along, we're going to talk about Gabe Jackus. Okay. Now, one evaluator said that the pronunciation of his last name, which has been a discussion in the draft community for a number of months now, is in fact Jackus, not Yakis. So, Gabe Jackus out of Illinois checks in at 6'3 and 1/8, 260 pounds, and his wrestling background shows up immediately in how he plays. His hand usage, leverage, and ability to control contact are advanced for a player his age. In 2025, Jack has put together a breakout season, recording 11 sacks, 13 and a half tackles for loss, and 3 forced fumbles, while earning an 88.5 PFF pass rush grade over 529 snaps. He also bench pressed 285 pounds for 22 reps and will be just 21 years old at the time of the draft, which matters when projecting physical development. He's athletic, scheme flexible, and comfortable playing with his hand in the dirt or standing up. He's also a big game performer, consistently elevating his play against top competition. That combination of youth, production, and physical tools is appealing to teams. Where yet Jackus still needs work is a pass rush variety. He leans heavily on the bull rush, trusting his strength to overwhelm blockers. At the NFL level, he'll need to develop counters to keep tackles honest. Even so, his floor as a rotational edge who can play early downs and special teams is very solid. And you saw him do a lot of work this year at Illinois from a standing up position. This guy's got legitimate pop, legitimate power, and he really can put his hand down in the dirt or stand up and pop off the line still. That's an important thing. I think when, to bring that to a New England angle, we saw this year New England trade. Why is the name evading me right now? The edge rusher to San Francisco. His name was Keon White. Sorry. Keon White to San Fran. Now, Keon White was a guy who didn't perfectly fit our scheme, right? About 6'3-ish, 275, just ripped up, right? Jacked dude. And you look at him and it's like, how can he not be an amazing edge? Well, for us, it was because we asked him to stand up so much. This is a guy that's used to having his hand down in the dirt, that's used to dominating with power, not with quickness necessarily, not with, technical pass rush moves off the edge. And so he just didn't quite work for our scheme. You've got to have guys in our scheme on the edge that are comfortable standing up and getting off from that way. It really makes a huge difference, and it's the difference between us keeping a guy around for a while and kind of letting him develop, even if he's not really producing right away. So you look at like a Braden Swinson, Elijah Ponder, Kayla Von Chason, um, versus trading him for a bag of chips to San Francisco, like we did with Keon White. Moving right along, we've got Max Llewellyn as an edge player out of Iowa. Now, Max measures in at 6'5" and a quarter, 255 pounds. And reporters covering the Senior Bowl consistently said that he looks the part. Again, that Mel Kiper is an LTPer. Long frame, good proportions, and the type of body teams like betting on at edge rusher. Now, in 2025, his first year as a starter in Iowa, Llewellyn recorded 22 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. And before you ask, why was that his first year starting, despite the fact he was a senior then? Iowa is known for valuing seniority and development. So it's not unusual for players there to wait their turn. And when Llewellyn got his opportunity, he made the most of it. And what I'll bring you back to is Lucas Van Ness a few years back, drafted out of Iowa, a little bit of a tweener type guy, slightly bigger than Llewellyn is here. But he was a guy who was drafted with absolutely zero college starting experience. He had never started even one game in college. Why was that? Because he played at Iowa. And Iowa doesn't give a shit how good you are. Are you a freshman? Then you're sitting. Are you a sophomore? Well, if the guy in front of you is a junior, you're sitting. You're a junior? Hey, guess what? The guy in front of you is a senior. He's still 1 year ahead. Guess what? You're still sitting. You won't start until you are atop the seniority line at your position group. And so Max Llewellyn sat there at Iowa patiently waiting his turn. And when he got his turn, that's what he did. 9 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. Pretty solid stat line for his 2025 year. What stands out most with Llewellyn is his pass rush plan. He's not just freelancing. He has a well-timed spin move and shows understanding of how to set up blockers over the course of a rep. Multiple reports have described him as a hidden gem with a high floor due to his technical refinement. His biggest issue right now is pad level. When he plays too tall, he loses leverage and power. If that gets cleaned up, he projects as a reliable situational rusher with starter upside in the right system. Moving right along to the next guy, we're going to talk about Derek Moore. He's an edge defender out of Michigan, and man, does he have the combine, or sorry, not the combine, the Senior Bowl buzzing right now. Okay. Derek Moore measures in at 6'3" and a half, 254 pounds, a little bit lighter than we thought he would be, actually. He was listed at about 265 at Michigan. I like that because he fits the Patriots scheme a little better and a little smaller. Um, he immediately announced himself at the Senior Bowl by having the absolute rep of the day. Okay. He just completely bulldozes Markel Bell in one-on-one drills. So what, right? Guys get run over all the time. Markel Bell is 6'9", 360 pounds. He is a mountain of a man. And Derek Moore said, I don't give a shit, and ran right through him. Okay, he put this gigantic man on the ground, stepped over him just like what? Absolutely dominant rep that brings you back to the Mike Green rep over Josh Connerly last year, with the exception that Josh Connerly is not a giant. Okay, Josh Connerly, I mean, he's an offensive tackle. He's a good sized human, right? He's like 6'4", 315, something in that neighborhood. Markel Bell is a literal giant. Okay, 6'9", 360, just a massive hulking human being. And Derek Moore ran right through him like he wasn't even there. In 2025, Moore started all 13 games, recording 10 sacks and 2 forced fumbles and earning 2-time All Big Ten honors. His get off is electric. He explodes upfield and forces tackles to open their hips early, creating rushing lanes. He converts speed to power extremely well, using violent hands to collapse the pocket. His motor is relentless, showing up in backside pursuit and extended plays. He hunts from whistle to whistle and doesn't take snaps off. That is our kind of guy in New England. The next step for Moore is refining his pass rush plan. Right now, he relies heavily on athleticism and physicality. This practice setting suits him well, but teams will want to see more technical consistency to project him as more than a high energy rotational rusher. Moving right along, we've got Zion Young, an edge rusher out of Missouri. Now, Young checks in at 6'5" and a quarter, 262 pounds, and physically, he looks exactly what you want an edge defender to look like. Multiple evaluators mentioned how well he carries his weight and length there at the Senior Bowl. In 2025, Young started all 13 games, recording 42 total tackles, 16 and a half tackles for loss, and 6.5 sacks, along with a 25.6% win rate on true pass rush sets and a 9.3% stop rate. These numbers point to a player who consistently impacts plays, even when he isn't finishing with sacks. He sets the edge well, has legitimate bull rush power, and plays with relentless pursuit. He's assignment sound and difficult to move in the run game, which gives him early down value. The concerns come down to explosiveness and timing. His snap get off can be late, and his pad level isn't always consistent. He may never be a pure speed rusher, but his size and power give him a solid floor as a dependable NFL edge. Zion Young is a guy who I've seen mocked all over the place in the past few weeks. Okay. I saw one mock recently where he went 15th. I believe that was a Walter football mock that wasn't great, to be honest. Um, but they had him going 15th or 16th, so mid first round. And I've seen him mocked late day two. So there are some questions. There's some differing opinions with Zion Young. He's trying to settle all those things this week. He's got a few more days of practice to do it. Moving along now, we've got Romello Height, an edge rusher out of Texas Tech. Romello measures in at 6'2" and 3/8, 234 pounds, which makes him clearly an undersized pass rusher by NFL standards. In 2025, he recorded 38 tackles, 11 and a half tackles for loss, and 10 sacks, showing real production. Now, his college journey has been unusual, okay? He started at Auburn, then moved to USC, then moved to Georgia Tech, and finally Texas Tech. That much movement, it's a legitimate red flag for teams evaluating stability and development. Okay. These days, you've got players that are just hopping from school to school to school. And when you get to the end of that journey, teams want to know why. Why? Were you a pain in the ass to deal with? Did you not fit the system well? Were you not coachable? Did you need a specific environment, specific staff around you to motivate you just right, or something to that effect? You know, there are different personality issues, there are different scheme fit issues, there are different, all kinds of different reasons that would have a player move from one place to the next beyond the paycheck with the NIL deals, right? Height was not a guy who was cashing big NIL checks or any of that. Um, Prior to 2025 anyway. This was really his breakout season. He's also about 25, 26 years old. I really should have written that down for this. Let's see. So he's 24 years old right now. He will be 25 by the time the draft actually happens, making him one of the older prospects in this class. Usually, I don't put a lot of value on older players who had a late breakout. You couple that with the red flags surrounding him hopping school to school and being so undersized, he's not really a guy that's on my radar for the Patriots beyond the fact that he would be a system fit because of his size and build. Um, Now on the field, the height's first step quickness, it's elite. He can win the corner before tackles get into their kick slide, and his ability to drop into coverage it's rare for an edge rusher. Okay. Now, again, given his size, given his movement skills, I wouldn't call it shocking, but it's rare. The thing about it is that you're really not asking edge players to drop into coverage very often, right? So if you're not great at it, who cares? But that leaves the other side of that. If you're great at it, also, who cares? It's not really what you we want you to do. Okay. Um, Anyway, he processes blocking schemes quickly. He doesn't get stuck in traffic. Now, the issue again, it's just size, okay? When offensive tackles get clean hands on him, he struggles to disengage and generate any push at all. And that showed up on day 1. He lost reps to Demetrius Crownover, who is another massive human being, okay? He checked in at 6'6" and 7/8, 340 pounds, I think it was. Um and you saw these reps, which kinda it's the perfect, um, one-on-one drill for the Senior Bowl because you have Demetrius Crownover on this side, who's a gigantic human being, and the questions are, how are you gonna deal with speed rushers? Are they gonna be able to outquick you? That sort of thing, right? Or is your length gonna be able to contain them regardless of how quick they are? The question was answered on this rep in the favor of Demetrius Crownover, who, once he got his hands on Romello Height, simply didn't let go. Romello did everything he could, including pushing up so hard on the man that he ripped his helmet off. Demetrius Crownover didn't care, finished the rep with no helmet, and threw Romello Height to the side. Um, I think there are too many issues and red flags with Romello Height for me to be interested in him where he's might go. I've seen him projected as high as late first round, which is wild to me. I could see him going late day 2, but still, I really don't want anything to do with that myself as a New England Patriots fan. Um, you know, he projects as a specialized sub package rusher. Teams are going to need to be comfortable with that because you simply can't put this guy on the field on rushing plays. Certainly not in the NFL. He might have hung around a little bit at Texas Tech there, but that's it. Now, one thing that's important for people to understand is that teams don't leave this week with like a neat numbered ranking of defensive linemen, right? What they build instead are tiers. And that starts almost immediately. By the end of the first practice, every defensive line coach and scout already has players mentally sorted into buckets. Okay. These aren't final grades yet, they're role based tiers. But once you're placed into a tier, it's much easier to move within it than to jump out of it. The first tier is what I'd call early down core players. These are guys teams trust to line up on first and second down and not get the defense in trouble. They may not be flashy pass rushers, but they can anchor, control gaps, set the edge, and play with discipline. Interior players in this tier don't get displaced easily. Edge players in this tier can set the edge and hold up against the run. For a lot of defensive linemen, landing in this tier is how you get drafted. Coaches value reliability up front more than fans realize, and this tier fills rosters every single year. Now, the second tier is sub package and pass rush specialists. These are players who may not be trusted in every situation, but who can absolutely affect the quarterback. This includes speed rushers, interior penetrators, and guys who win with one or two elite traits. They might come off the field on early downs, but when it's third and long, They're out there getting after the quarterback. At the Senior Bowl, this tier forms quickly during one on ones early on. If a player can consistently win isolated pass rush reps, teams take notice, even if his run defense is still a work in progress. At the end of the day, this game is about the quarterback, right? Offensively, it's about how good is your quarterback? Can he get the ball to the wide receiver? Can he run the offense, etc. Defensively, it's can you get that guy on the ground? Then you have the developmental traits tier. Now, this is where size, length, movement skills really come into play. These players might not win many reps early in the week, but their technique may be inconsistent. Their pad level might be all over the place. But if they look the part physically, teams start projecting forward. This is where coaches say, give me this body and I'll teach him how to play. Not everyone in this tier gets drafted, but when they do, it's often earlier than fans expect. Now, after that comes the situational or niche tier. These are players who do one or two things well, but have clear limitations. Undersized speed rushers, interior defenders who can penetrate but can't anchor against the run, edges who can drop but struggle to disengage. These players can still carve out NFL roles, but teams have to be very intentional about how they're used. Special teams value matters a lot here. If a player can rush in sub packages and cover kicks, that keeps them on the roster. Finally, there's the fringe tier. Players who are fighting to prove they belong in the draftable conversation at all. For these guys, the Senior Bowl is less about winning every rep and more about showing competitiveness, coachability, and growth. Really, it's about showing that they fit in with this group of would be or going to be NFL players, right? And I mean, you can kind of immediately tell that. Um, Now, one good day isn't going to save these guys, but one bad day can hurt them. The key thing to understand is this: tiers form quickly and they harden quickly. Players can absolutely help themselves over the course of the week, but jumping from fringe to core player is rare. Moving from developmental to rotational, that happens. Moving from rotational to trusted early down player, that takes consistent confirmation. And that's why day one matters so much. It doesn't finalize evaluations, but it sets the lane you're driving in for the rest of the week. From that point forward, teams are mostly looking for confirmation, not reinvention. And for defensive linemen, especially, once those tiers are set, they tend to hold all the way through draft weekend. When you look at how the Patriots have historically built their defensive front and how they've continued to do it, even through coaching and roster changes, their philosophy lines up very cleanly with the way these Senior Bowl tiers form. The Patriots have never chased defensive linemen purely for flash. They prioritize role clarity, reliability, and multiplicity. That means they're almost always looking first at players who fall into the early down core tier and the rotational pass rush tier, rather than gambling exclusively on traits only projections. Up front, the Patriots want defenders they can trust not to break the structure of the defense. That starts with gap control, interior defenders who can anchor, absorb double teams, and keep linebackers clean tend to stay on the field. Edge players who can set the edge and not get washed out matter more than raw sack totals. And I will add that that has typically been true. Under this new Patriots system, um, I remember hearing Milton Williams talk in the summer about how it was easier than Philadelphia because you didn't really have to worry about a lot of diagnosis. You didn't have to worry about much except pinning your ears back and getting that quarterback on the ground. That's really primarily what they're worried about here. Um, Setting the edge, run defense, stuff like that, especially for our edge rushers, not as much of a priority. Definitely don't really care about how they drop out into coverage. Look, it can help on some of those screenplays and so forth. We saw Kayla Von Chason blow one up in the AFC Championship game, for instance, but that's not the driving force that's going to get you onto this team. Okay. Um, so that's why Patriots boards often look different from public consensus boards. Players fans label as boring frequently sit much higher internally because the Patriots value defenders who allow the rest of the defense to function. A defensive lineman who does his job every snap, even without flashy production, has real value in this system. Where the Patriots also overlap heavily is with the rotational and sub package tier. They've consistently invested in edge defenders who may not be full time starters, but can win in specific situations. Third down rushers, interior penetrators, players who can move around the front and create matchup problems. The Patriots don't need every defensive lineman to be a star. They need them to win their assignments. And, the famous phrase in New England, of course, do your job. Very simply, right? Your job may not be go get the breakout stats for the game, go make the play. It might be hold this guy up so the guy next to you can go make the play. But that's what you do. You get in there and you do your job. This is especially true when you look at how often New England rotates its defensive front. They're comfortable playing 8 or 9 linemen meaningful snaps if it keeps players fresh and allows situational matchups. The development's traits tier is where things get more selective. The Patriots will take trait bets, but they tend to be very specific about which ones. Length matters, size matters, versatility especially matters, and whether or not they can use you in special teams. That's a very important driving factor for those late roster additions as well. What they generally avoid are players who are athletic but lack either positional discipline or a clear developmental path. I will also say that Mike Vrabel has shown a penchant for um, players who have a rep for being difficult to coach. Okay, we saw him with Javon Baker last year show a great deal of patience. And we saw with Braden Swinson as well, who ended up on the practice squad for most of the year, got signed for the last few weeks, but was, healthy scratch every week. I don't think he played any snaps this year. Oh, no. Actually, wait. He did play in one game. They were getting the blowout. I just wasn't really impressed, but he played limited snaps over the final few weeks, perhaps. Still a guy that you take and he's worth the gamble, right? Because he's a fifth round pick. It's not a big investment. If you can turn him into something, great. Now, in other words, if a player is raw, the Patriots want to know exactly what he's going to become if things go right. Vague upside doesn't play as well here as it does with some other teams. This is also where football intelligence becomes a separator. Players who show they can take coaching during the week, make adjustments from rep to rep, and understand why something didn't work will stand out to the New England staff. Where the Patriots are least likely to invest heavily is the fringe tier. They will absolutely bring in undrafted free agents and camp bodies from that group, but draft capital usually goes to players who already fit a defined role. This is a team that prefers to reduce uncertainty, especially in the trenches. Now, all of this ties back to why the Senior Bowl matters so much for Patriots evaluations. This event answers the questions New England cares about. Can you execute your assignment in isolation? Can you communicate with new teammates? Can you handle coaching on the fly? And can you play with discipline against NFL caliber size and speed? Those answers matter more than highlight plays. So when you look at this defensive line group through that lens, the overlap becomes clear. Players who fit into early down reliability or rotational pass rush tiers tend to align best with the Patriots' philosophy. Players who need to reinvent themselves or rely purely on projection face a steeper climb. That doesn't mean they won't get drafted. It just means New England might not be the team that drafts them. And if they are, they'll be very honest about who they are and how they'll be used. And that's really the theme of this entire episode. The Senior Bowl isn't about finding stars, it's about defining roles. And for the Patriots, roles win games. All right. That wraps up the episode today. Um, Tomorrow, we move on to the offensive line. I have got a handful of players, I think about 10, 12 players at both the guard and tackle position that I'd like to talk about. I'd like to talk about how they might fit on this team in New England. And I'd like to talk about, how they're performing at the Senior Bowl. By then, we'll have news from the first 2 full days of Senior Bowl practice. I'll also bring you, a little bit of information about who the player is, their background, their strengths, their weaknesses, their build, also all sorts of good stuff. So tune in tomorrow, subscribe to the channel for more snap judgments. Remember, this is part one of a 5-day series where we're going to be covering nearly 50 players from the Senior Bowl, deep dives into each one of these guys. Follow along even if New England isn't your team, okay? Because a lot of these guys, New England can only draft 11 players. We're looking at 50 just this week. So most of these guys are going to end up on other teams. They might end up on yours, and you'll know a lot about them, won't you? Tune in tomorrow. We'll keep building this series out. Have a great day.